And there was a time when people believed that engineering is more important than architecture. In the third year, it became clear to me that that's not true, that architecture is much more complex, and more going there, and so on. And as is usual, when you really ask why engineering, that was because of friends. The friends around you say, this is the good thing to do, this is a good thing to do. Anyway, but I could have been a musician because I was playing music, doing conservatory of music at that stage, and then decided not to be professional. My teacher was clever enough to tell me that now, why does architecture come in? It comes in probably because it's very close, well, I certainly felt at that time that it's a very synthetic subject, not specialized, very imaginative. So next to the music, I felt that architecture may be the nearest subject to go for. The complexity of city, individual buildings, but very soon I was interested in looking at relationship in a kind of hierarchical sense, how you go from one piece to a larger context and eventually you end up in the city. So practically from that on until now, what I'm really interested in, what I'm working in, is the relationship between the plausible context, scale, segment of a city, call it, and then individual pieces in it. And that particular oscillation, I think, is one of the most interesting. Anything in culture must be happening somewhere. And the somewhere matters. When it comes to it, we are very, very fussy or careful. Where do you play your music? It's too big, it's too empty, and so on and so on. So it is with all the rest. People in the theater are very sensitive to place. And probably also the relationship, which I find very interesting, between architecture and the kind of broader context of culture. It's interesting that a large number of film directors were trained as architects, and even theater directors. Peter Brook, Fellini in film, and so it goes, so it goes. So architecture, as the end of sentence, interests me as cultural phenomenon, as a foundation, and in English you say embodiment, Verkörperung der Kultur. This gives it the body and foundation, and the rest follows from it. To be absolutely honest, our education in architecture nowadays, beyond the technical subjects, in cultural kind of context, is very, very bad. And if you sort of extend the field, you're not really going beyond architecture, you're moving to something which is very much normal architecture, how it should be. If you read Corbusier, he was not a bad architect, he was quite an okay architect, wasn't he? Visually together. And, he wrote about cities and God knows what else. We may not agree with most of it, but it doesn't matter. He was very well read, very intelligent, thinking person. He was a philosopher. And I think intelligent, well, even people like Frank Lloyd Wright or Mies van der Rohe or these people, they were relatively very, very educated people, privately educated. They didn't go to schools, universities and so on, but well educated and thinking. So I would say that, going beyond the narrow territory of architecture as a profession, we practically going back to something which is normal, that how it should be. In other words, what we have now as normal is rather subnormal. Peter Cook, actually, strangely enough, is very sensitive to that. And I remember when I was teaching at AA, and he was next door, we used to communicate quite a bit. He had a very strong case for that, and he would call it architectural literacy. Architects are literate or illiterate. There was a kind of romantic vision of an artist, that artists should be stupid in order to be creative. And that's a romantic dream. It doesn't work like that in reality. You have to be intelligent and think about it quite a lot. And you can see it because, particularly nowadays, the situation is so tough and so confusing, so complicated, that you have to really sit down and think very carefully. What is it you really want to do? What do you consider to be relevant? It doesn't come out from, sort of there. It comes from here somehow. So that's where we are. So that's why I would write, only for the sake of making the understanding of what we're doing slightly more clear, for no other reason. In a way, we are in the same company as it were, people who working in offices and people who not working in offices but are very close and contributing to it. It helps because, if you forget about the people in philosophy and history and you are just in the studio, the truth is that in order to gain any kind of literacy, you read books. And I would prefer to read books of people who have something intelligent to say about philosophy of the subject, history of the subject. The critique, I probably don't need that much. And theory, I wouldn't bother. So there is always thinking going on with your hand. And I do believe that people who do the opposite thing, that they think and write something, they almost sort of able to imagine what it is like to draw it. So I would see them as complementary. They belong together. They're very close. And they seem to be kind of contributing mutually to each other. I don't see them as two separate things. And I would measure also the relevance then. So the notion of thinking and working, it's a question of intelligence. And there is a verbal intelligence, and there is a visual intelligence. The amount of lectures, energy, input that goes into technical subjects, generally speaking everywhere, in America, Europe, whatever, is about 3 to 4 times more into technical subjects than it should probably go in relation to the humanities, which is usually sort of considered to be a peripheral problem. And yet, architecture from the very beginning to the end is a humanistic discipline. There is hardly any architecture without people. And if you don't take that into account, how do you say anything about rooms, spaces, configurations, layouts, cities? Again and again, you come across the criteria that come from humanities, really. How people behave, how they respond, how they experience. That's what architecture is about, in the end, is, how you inhabit a place.